nhiều sọc một đáy cho nó thì dễ nhiều sọc một đáy vậy đi nhìn lại cái sọc luôn một cái thiết này mình những khâu giờ sọc nữa bây giờ như sọc ở miền cũng mới mang đi vào đi cả nồi cả đồ ba một ba cá gì thôi đây này sọc ở đây mà
In the shadow of the temple's rise, warriors chant beneath the skies, glory carved in every stone, a kingdom's tale forever known. Blades of golden morning light, echoes of valor through the night, kings and queens of olden days, legacy that never fades. Hear the cheers of victory, ancient walls in history, rise and fall we stand again, in the heart of Angkor men.
Bật bánh môi mặt
Rivers flow with legal grace, past and future face to face, songs of lands that time forgot, in our hearts they're never lost.
Đây tiền lá đây một lần
Feats of bravery, bold they stand, heroes raised from sacred land, trumpets sound the final call, in Angkor's glory we enthrall. In the wind of prayer soar, guardian spirits we implore, ancient echoes through the years, victory sweet through fallen tears. Hear the cheers of victory, ancient walls in history, rise and fall we stand again, in the heart of Angkor men. Hear the cheers of victory, ancient walls in history, rise and fall we stand again, in the heart of Angkor men. Rivers flow with regal grace, past and future face to face, songs of lands that time forgot, in our hearts they're never lost.
Welcome to Cambodia. Today we are going to learn part 3 with 7D channel episode 5.2.6. Part 3, Blacksmithing French Colonial Period, 1863 to 1953. The French Colonial Period in Cambodia, 1863 to 1953, was a transformative time for the country, with significant changes in various aspects of life, including culture, economy, and technology. Blacksmithing, like many other traditional crafts, was influenced by French colonial policies, technological advancements, and new economic structures. During this period, Cambodian blacksmithing saw a mix of traditional practices and the introduction of European methods and tools, as well as the impact of colonial governance on local artisans. The French colonial influence on Cambodia. When the French established a protectorate over Cambodia in 1863, they introduced new governance, infrastructure, and technologies. While French colonial officials were interested in modernizing Cambodia, they also maintained some traditional Cambodian practices, including blacksmithing, which remained a key craft, particularly in rural areas. The French influence on blacksmithing was evident in the introduction of new techniques, tools, and industrial methods. Blacksmithing during the early colonial period, 1863-1900s. In the early years of French rule, Cambodia remained largely rural, and traditional crafts like blacksmithing were still integral to daily life. Blacksmiths in the villages produced items essential for survival, such as agricultural tools, weapons, farming implements, and household items. The French colonial administration, however, began to push for more centralized production and modernization, which began to affect local crafts. Agricultural tools and military needs. Agricultural tools such as hoes, plows, and spades were still in high demand, especially for rice cultivation, which was the backbone of Cambodia's economy. Blacksmiths continued to create these tools using traditional hand forging methods. Weapons and armor were also crafted during this period, although the demand for traditional weapons decreased due to the pacification efforts of the French. However, blacksmiths continued making tools for both local defense and the French military. French influence. Introduction of modern techniques, 1900s to 1930s. By the early 20th century, French colonial rule began to have a stronger influence on Cambodian blacksmithing. The French introduced industrial methods of production, as well as new tools and materials that changed the craft. Industrialization and mechanization. The French introduced industrial tools and machinery, such as steam-powered forges and mechanical hammers, to increase the efficiency of production. This modernization was particularly seen in the construction of railroads, bridges, and mining equipment where metal tools and parts were essential. However, traditional hand forging remained common in rural blacksmith shops, as many artisans continued to work with manual tools and techniques. The introduction of these industrial methods allowed for some overlap, where local blacksmiths might incorporate new tools, but still rely on older methods for certain tasks. Iron and steel production. The French colonial period saw increased demand for iron and steel in infrastructure projects, such as building railroads, roads, and dams. Blacksmiths in Cambodia were now tasked with producing metal parts for these larger-scale projects, as well as continuing to produce everyday goods. While some blacksmiths adopted European methods of working with steel, traditional techniques of iron forging were still maintained in rural areas for agricultural tools, weapons, and household implements. Blacksmithing and the French military. Blacksmiths played a key role in the supply of the French military, particularly as colonial rule in Cambodia was enforced. The French needed weapons and ammunition to keep order and suppress resistance movements, and blacksmiths often worked in conjunction with colonial authorities to meet military needs. Tools and weaponry for the military. Blades, knives, and bayonets were crafted by blacksmiths for the French army and the colonial police. The need for swords and daggers in the military diminished with the advent of firearms, but local blacksmiths still made these items alongside other practical tools. Additionally, blacksmiths were employed to produce metal parts for French military equipment, including cannons and ammunition. This work was typically more organized and mechanized than traditional blacksmithing, as part of the broader push to modernize Cambodia's infrastructure. Decline of traditional blacksmithing. With the French colonial administration pushing for modernization and the development of industrial sectors, traditional crafts like blacksmithing began to see a decline. The French aimed to develop Cambodia's infrastructure with large-scale factories, mines, and railroads, which relied on industrial processes and imported goods. This shift gradually led to a reduced demand for locally produced hand-forged tools and weapons, as more mechanized and factory-produced items were imported. Additionally, the colonial system focused on producing goods for the European market, rather than prioritizing the needs of local craftsmen. This shift in the economy and the decline of self-sufficiency in rural areas meant that many traditional blacksmiths found themselves unable to compete with mass-produced goods. The role of blacksmiths in the post-war era, 1945 to 1953. As World War II disrupted colonial rule in Southeast Asia, the influence of the French began to wane. Cambodia's path to independence, which culminated in 1953, also led to a revival of local craftsmanship, including blacksmithing. However, by this time, many traditional blacksmiths had either adapted to new technologies or struggled to maintain their craft in the face of industrialization. Some blacksmiths, particularly in rural areas, continued their work using traditional methods, producing agricultural tools, household items, and even ornamental works for local use. Others, however, found new work in the expanding sectors of the colonial economy, such as railroads and mining, where industrial metalworking was in demand. Cultural preservation and transition. Despite the decline in demand for traditional blacksmithing during the French colonial period, the craft did not disappear. Many blacksmiths were able to preserve their craft through generations, passing down the knowledge of hand forging and metalworking. Cultural preservation became especially important after Cambodia's independence in 1953, when there was a renewed interest in maintaining traditional arts and crafts. The legacy of French colonial blacksmithing is still evident today in Cambodia's traditional metalworking. Modern blacksmiths often combine the old hand-forging techniques with new technology to produce tools, agricultural implements, and decorative items, keeping alive the craft that was influenced by centuries of change. Conclusion: the French colonial period, 1863 to 1953, marked a pivotal era in Cambodian blacksmithing. While traditional blacksmithing continued to serve local needs, the introduction of industrial technologies and the shift toward mechanization brought significant changes to the craft. Blacksmiths adapted by incorporating European techniques and tools into their practices, but many continued to use traditional methods in rural areas. The legacy of this period, where modernization met tradition, left an indelible mark on Cambodia's metalworking heritage. Thank you for listening. See you soon.